So the race grifting reparations racket is at it again. And this is the bill that a group of activists and academics have decided Britain owes for the crime of slavery. Not millions, not billions, but 24 trillion. I mean, it's more than the entire wealth of the United Kingdom. Obviously an impossible and astronomical sum, which clearly indicates this is just a shakedown. And what's worse, it's built on a foundation of nasty little lies. The reality is this has got absolutely nothing to do with justice for the past, and it's all about an ideological assault on our present. So let me be quite clear. The transatlantic slave trade was a monstrous crime on an industrial scale. And no question, its evil is a permanent stain on the history of the West. But it's precisely because that crime was so serious that the modern campaign for reparations must be exposed for what it is. It's not a moral crusade. It's a coordinated political campaign to extract wealth and power. It's not a grassroots movement. This is a long-term, state-sponsored race grifting project. The African Union has declared 2025 the year of reparations and is launching a decade of reparations to run until 2036. At a summit in September 2025, this month, they partnered with Caribbean nations to ensure they speak with one voice in their demands on the West. So this new AU chairperson, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, has made it quite clear that apologies are apparently no longer sufficient, and their demands go far beyond simple payment for past wrongdoings. They call for debt cancellation, technology transfer, and even restructuring the United Nations. It's like someone demanding compensation for a fender bender, and then also demanding the keys to your house and a seat on the local council. It reveals that the car crash was just the pretext. And this entire project is just a racially motivated Trojan horse. They're using the real and profound guilt that people feel about slavery as a lever to advance a radical modern political agenda. They don't want to right historical wrong. They want to dismantle the current world order, and they've decided that the British taxpayer is the one that's going to pay for it. So the campaign's defenders will no doubt say this is simply acknowledgement and atonement for a terrible crime. Well, so why does their official 10-point plan include demands to re-engineer the modern global economy? That's not atonement. It's a political manifesto masquerading as a moral claim. But for a campaign that claims the moral high ground, it's built on a staggeringly dishonest version of history that conveniently ignores a few rather large details. So the reparations lobby has a very simple view of history. White Europeans were the perpetrators of slavery and black Africans were the victims. A powerful story. But it's also a fraud. They never mention the Arab slave trade, which predated the transatlantic slave trade by 700 years and lasted until the 20th century. Mauritania, an African Union member, only officially abolished slavery in 1981, and they want to ask us for reparations. Historians estimate this trade enslaved as many as 18 million Africans. The silence from the African Union on this point is deafening. They make no demands on Saudi Arabia, Libya, or any of the Arab nations that grew rich from this trade for over a millennium. It's like prosecuting one member of a crime syndicate while ignoring the godfathers. It proves the case isn't about the principle of justice for slavery. It's about selectively targeting a defendant, the West, who they think has the capacity and the guilt to pay. But it gets worse. While Africans were being enslaved in their millions, so were Europeans. The Barbary slave trade, run from North African ports, captured and enslaved up to 1.25 million white Europeans. Barbary pirates raided coastal villages, not just in Italy and Spain, but as far away as Cornwall, dragging men, women, and children away in chains. Apologists claim the transatlantic trade was uniquely evil because it was on an industrial scale and based on race. Well, I'm sorry, but slavery is slavery. The suffering of an Englishman chained to an oar in Algiers or an African woman sold in a Zanzibar market is absolute. A principled demand for justice would condemn all of it. To focus only on the crimes of the West is not a moral position, it is a political calculation. This isn't about principle. It's about targeting the nations with the deepest pockets and the most developed sense of self-loathing. But their selective history doesn't just apply to other slave traders. What's worse is it applies to themselves. It applies to Africa. The story we're told is of European ships arriving on the coast of peaceful, bountiful Africa and kidnapping people. It's just a childish fairy tale. The transatlantic slave trade was a business, a disgusting business, a brutal and evil business, but it had willing local partners. The capture and sale of slaves was for the most part run by Africans themselves. They enslaved their own. Powerful, expansionist African empires built their fortunes on it. The kingdom of Dahomey in modern-day Benin was a state organised for war, raiding its neighbours to capture its own people to sell to Europeans. The Asante Empire in Ghana and the Oyo Empire in Nigeria did the exact same thing, trading human beings, their own people, for firearms to fuel more conquests. They're not helpless victims. They are ruthless and successful business partners. When the British tried to persuade the King of Dahomey to stop the trade in the 1840s, he refused. "The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people," he said, "the source of their glory and wealth." So it's central to his kingdom's power and identity. I mean, this just demolishes the simplistic moral narrative of the reparations campaign, and it asks a deeply uncomfortable question. If the descendants of the buyers owe reparations, do the descendants of the sellers not also bear some responsibility? The modern states of Ghana and Benin are the successors to the Asante and Dahomey empires. By what moral logic do they get to stand with the descendants of the victims and demand payment while erasing their role their own ancestors played as perpetrators? So the counter-argument is that African kingdoms were coerced into the trade by superior European military powers. Well, that's just a colonial mindset. It patronisingly assumes Africans had no agency. The historical record shows powerful kings and merchants who controlled the supply, set the prices, and grew fantastically wealthy. They were partners in crime, not puppets. The moral case for reparations collapses when you admit that it conveniently ignores half of the guilty parties. But the historical dishonesty doesn't end there. They also lie, by omission, about Britain. So while Britain's hands are indeed stained by the slave trade, that's only half the story. The other half, the half the grievance industry wants you to forget about, is that Britain, more than any other nation on earth, is responsible for ending slavery. After banning the trade in 1807, Britain didn't just walk away. It launched almost a 100-year war on slavery. The Royal Navy's West African Squadron was the world's first, and for a long time only, international police force. For decades, British sailors have fought and died to stamp out the trade. They seized 1,600 slave ships and freed 150,000 Africans. This was the most expensive international humanitarian mission in modern history, and it cost thousands of British lives. Nearly 2,000 sailors died, one for every 9 slaves they freed. And the financial cost was staggering. To pay the compensation required by the 1833 Abolition Act, the British government took out a massive loan, equivalent to 40% of its entire national budget. And here is the crucial fact they never tell you. The debt was so large it was only fully paid off by British taxpayers in 2015. Let that sink in. Everyone paying tax in this country, including the descendants of slaves, was still paying for the abolition of slavery just a few years ago. Britain made a multi-generational national sacrifice to end this evil. They will say that the squadron was ineffective and that the government only compensated the slave owners and not the enslaved. Well, fair enough, the compensation was a flawed compromise of its time, but the fact still remains. The British public was taxed for 182 years to pay for the abolition of an institution from which most of them never benefited. No other country, not France, not Spain, not the Arab states, and certainly not the African slave trading kingdoms, paid such a price to redeem their sin. The supreme irony is that modern Britain just finished paying the bill for ending slavery, and now we're being handed a new, infinitely larger bill for starting it. This staggering hypocrisy isn't just historical, it's happening right now. The African Union's moral posturing on historical slavery would be offensive enough, but it becomes an even worse joke when you look at the state of their own countries today. Africa is the global epicenter of modern slavery. Right now, on any given day, there are an estimated 7 million people living in slavery on the continent. 2 African Union member states, Eritrea and Mauritania, have the second and third highest prevalence of slavery on the entire planet. And what about the money? Sub-Saharan Africa is, according to Transparency International, the most corrupt region on earth. We're not talking about petty bribery here. We're talking about state-sponsored theft on a mind-boggling scale. In Equatorial Guinea, the president's son has had hundreds of millions of dollars of assets seized, including mansions and a private jet, while his people live in poverty. I mean, in Nigeria, the corruption is estimated to cost the country $140 billion a year. That's a quarter of its entire economy. The idea of sending trillions of pounds of British taxpayers' money to these regimes is not just absurd, it's immoral. It'd be the largest transfer of wealth from the working people of a developed country to the corrupt elites of failed states in human history. The money wouldn't build schools or hospitals. It'll end up in a Swiss bank account, or ironically, a London property, funding the lifestyles of the very kleptocrats who are the true authors of their people's misery. So the counter-argument will claim that modern corruption is just another legacy of colonialism. It's always somebody else's fault. Well, after more than 60 years of independence, I'm sorry, but that excuse has just worn thin. Blaming the British for the decision of a modern Nigerian official to steal billions from his own people is a pathetic abdication of responsibility. The problem in Africa isn't a lack of money, it's a lack of honest government. This entire campaign is a gigantic deflection, a way for failed leaders to point the finger at the past, to distract from their own catastrophic failures in the present. So if this isn't about history, and it's not about helping ordinary people, what's the real agenda? This was never about a 200-year-old crime. It's about a modern-day ideological assault, a grift. Look at the pattern. A fake history that erases Arab and African guilt while ignoring British sacrifice, a cynical deflection from modern-day slavery and corruption, and an impossible financial demand designed not for payment but for leverage. The money is the Trojan horse. The real goal is to force Britain and the West into a state of perpetual inherited guilt, to rewrite our history as uniquely shameful, and to use that shame to dismantle our national identity and extort geopolitical concessions. This is a culture war fought with calculators and falsified history. To accept their demands, or even their premise, is to accept that we are uniquely guilty as a nation, deserving of perpetual punishment. It is to surrender our story, our confidence, and our future.